The coat was already on, and my keys were in my hand when my phone screen lit up on the counter. I almost didn't look. I was running 12 minutes behind. And my brother had hated when people were late since we were children. He had the same expression at 41 that he'd had at 14 whenever I came downstairs slow. But I looked. It was a text from my investigator, 3 sentences. No punctuation at the end of the last one. Don't get in that car, call me now. I found everything. A second later, my brother's name came up. Just pulled into the cottage. Notary's here, can't wait to finally get this chapter closed. See you soon, okay? I set my keys down very slowly. I took off my coat and I called my investigator back. Before I tell you what he found, I want to ask you something. Have you ever looked back at a long stretch of your life and realized that none of it was an accident? That what felt like your own failings was actually someone else's planning? Drop a comment below. I want to know if I'm the only one who needed a stranger's voice on the phone to understand what someone who loved them had been doing for years. My investigator didn't waste time. He'd been working the file for 6 weeks. I'd hired him quietly, after a bank statement from my mother's estate showed a redemption I didn't recognize, from an account I hadn't known existed, he said. I have the emails. He's been routing estate income through a numbered company since about 8 months after your mother died. The property appraisals he sent you were done by a guy who owes him a favor. The real assessments show the cottage and the investment portfolio together are worth somewhere around $1.2 million. He's been telling you the estate is worth $3.8 I sat down on the floor, not the sofa, the floor. The notary he brought up tonight, my investigator said, had his commission revoked by the province 14 months ago. He is not licensed to certify anything. Whatever you sign in front of him is going to look official, just long enough for your brother to move the liquid assets before you figure out what happened. He'll have the whole weekend. A pause. And there's a man coming who works in a regulated healthcare field. He's not on your brother's call log by coincidence. He let that sit there for a moment. There's also a life insurance policy, he said. Your father's. A $240,000 payout. Your mother was the named beneficiary, which means it folded into the estate when she passed. Your brother never disclosed it to you. I had believed him. That was the part I kept returning to, sitting on the kitchen floor with my keys still on the counter. I had believed all of it for 3 years, without once thinking to question the shape of the belief itself. After our mother died, my brother became the executor. He was, by his own telling and by the family story we had both grown up inside, the capable one. The one who understood finances. The one who knew how these things worked. I was the one who had always been a bit scattered, a bit slow with paperwork, a bit too emotional when things got hard. I'd been telling myself that story so long I had stopped noticing that it was his story, not mine. He was always kind about it. That was what made the whole thing work. When I asked questions about the estate, he would answer patiently, with a gentleness that was almost worse than impatience. You don't need to worry about this part. I'll handle it. You were always more like Mom, right? Creative. Feeling things. That's not a bad thing, you know. And I would nod and feel grateful and go home, and not ask again for another few months. The investment statements he sent me showed consistent losses. Of course they did. He wrote them. The property assessment for the cottage I grew up in came back at a number that felt low, but what did I know? I wasn't in real estate. The call I made directly to the estate solicitor, in the first year, when something had nagged at me enough that I picked up the phone. My brother had called ahead. I discovered this later. He had mentioned gently to the solicitor that I was struggling with the grief, that I might ask questions from an emotional place rather than a rational one, that they should be patient with me. The solicitor had been very patient with me, had explained things slowly, had seemed entirely unsurprised when I thanked him, and said I trusted my brother to handle everything. I had thanked him. I had thanked the solicitor for sitting quietly while I was made a fool of, and then I had gone home. She thought she was managing a confused, grieving daughter. She was actually managing evidence. My investigator asked if I was still with him. I said yes. He said, "What do you want to do?" I thought about that for a moment that felt longer than it was. I could stay home, let my brother wait, make an excuse, call a lawyer on Monday and start the formal process. That was the careful thing, the clean thing. But I had been doing the careful thing for 3 years. And the careful thing had cost me most of what my mother left me. If I don't go tonight, I said, he'll know something's wrong. He'll move everything before I can get a court order. He'll have the whole weekend. My investigator said nothing. He already knew what I was thinking. I'm going, I said, but not the way he's expecting. I hung up, and I did not feel afraid. I felt something colder and sharper. The specific sensation of understanding the rules of a game you've been losing only because you didn't know you were playing. Before I left the city, I made 3 stops. The first was the community legal clinic 2 blocks from my apartment. Drop-in hours ran until 9 on Tuesdays. I explained what I needed, a statutory declaration, certified by a commissioner of oaths with a timestamp, confirming I had presented as lucid, coherent, and fully capable of understanding my affairs. It took 40 minutes and cost $65. I walked out with a document stating, in plain formal language, that, whatever happened next, no one could credibly claim I hadn't known exactly what I was doing. The second stop was to pick up the full printed package my investigator had sent to my email bank records. The emails, the property assessments, the registration documents for my brother's numbered company, and a copy of my father's insurance policy, traced through a Freedom of Information request on the estate file. The third stop was a phone call I made from a parking lot just before I hit the stretch of highway where service gets thin. I called my sister-in-law. She picked up on the second ring. There was something in the way she said hello. Careful, the way you say a word you aren't sure of the pronunciation of. That told me she was not alone in the room. I kept it simple. I said, "Is everything all right up there?" And she said, in a voice with all the warmth deliberately removed, "Yes, fine. The notary's been here a while." She paused. I thought this was just going to be family. That pause was the entire conversation. I said very quietly, "Did you know about what the documents actually say?" 5 seconds. "I found papers at home about a month ago," she said. I didn't know what to do with what I was reading. "That was enough. Don't tell him I called," I said. "Act normal. I'll be there in 2 hours." She said, "Be careful on the 400. There was construction near Barry last week." She had no reason to help me. She had every reason to be afraid. But she had found those papers a month ago and done nothing because she hadn't known who to call, and I understood that without any bitterness in it. I had spent 3 years not knowing who to call either. I called my lawyer from the car, hands-free, merging onto the 400 North. He was already driving. He had been driving since my investigator called him 45 minutes before calling me. He had 6 weeks of the file in his head, and had spent those 6 weeks being professionally patient while we built something solid enough to be worth using. He told me he'd be 10 minutes behind me, and that 2 OPP detectives already familiar with estate fraud cases were briefed and would park at the end of the cottage road to wait for his signal. I had a Garmin InReach clipped to the outside of my bag. It runs on satellite, no cell towers, no dead zones. That little device was the reason any of this was possible. Knowing that past Gravenhurst my phone would be useless. The drive up the 400 is a drive I've taken every summer since I was born. I know every interchange, every Tim Hortons exit, the exact point north of Barry where the Canadian Shield pushes up through the soil, and the trees crowd in, dark and tall and close. My mother always turned the radio up when we cleared Barry, and we'd crack the windows no matter the weather, and she'd sing along to songs she pretended not to know all the words to. Tonight the trees looked the same as they always had. I was the one looking differently. The logging road into the property is 2 kilometers off the main road. The cottage sits at the end of it, an A-frame built in the 70s on a small lake that nobody outside the township can find without directions. My mother had grown up nearby. She'd bought the lot in her 30s, before Muskoka property stopped being something people without family money could afford. In the estate documents my brother had given me, the cottage had been valued at $400,000. My investigator's independent assessor had placed it at $750, and climbing. My brother opened the door before I reached the porch steps. He was wearing the flannel shirt he always wore up here, and he had the expression he'd had my whole life. Warm, steady, isn't it good, we're all together. He pulled me into a hug. He smelled like the same soap he'd used since university. I hugged him back. I made sure my grip was relaxed. Inside, the wood stove was going. The dining table was set with coffee, and the shortbread from the tin that had lived on this counter as long as I could remember. The documents were stacked neatly beside a pen. The notary sat at the far end of the table, overdressed for cottage country, sweating slightly despite the October chill, with the expression of someone waiting for a specific thing to happen, and growing impatient with the waiting. Beside him, introduced as a friend of my brother's who happened to have his own place nearby, was a man who looked at me when I walked in with the focused, measuring attention that has nothing to do with friendliness. My sister-in-law was in the kitchen. She did not come out. "So, glad you made it," my brother said, his hand on the back of my chair, guiding me toward the seat positioned directly across from the document stack. "This is really just a formality. Once we get through the signing we can open a bottle and actually relax for the first time in 3 years." I sat down. I picked up the first page. I turned to the second. I read carefully and my brother let me, because stopping me would have been too obvious a move. He drank his coffee and the notary clicked his pen once, then twice. The clause I was looking for was on page 4, in the language that sounds like standard boilerplate, until you understand what boilerplate actually means. A full and irrevocable release of my beneficial interest in the estate, in exchange for a single disbursement of $195,000, representing my brother's assessed value of my rightful share. $195,000 from a $1.2 million estate. I set the page down. "You look a bit pale," said my brother's friend, leaning forward. "Your brother mentioned you've been carrying a lot of stress lately. Having a hard time with some decisions." He said it with professional ease, the way someone says something they've rehearsed in a register designed to sound like concern. Might be worth taking a breath before signing anything significant. I looked at him. I let the silence between us stay. Then I said, "I actually feel completely fine." I reached into my bag. The statutory declaration went on the table first. I watched my brother look at the timestamp. 2 hours ago, a registered commissioner of oaths at a community clinic in Barrie, my full name and signature, and a formal certification of my lucidity and competency at time of signing. His coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth and stayed there. The bank records went down next. The numbered company registration, the emails, and I watched his face when he recognized his own words made physical and placed in front of him by hands other than his own. The independent property assessment, my father's life insurance policy, with the estate listed as successor beneficiary, never once appearing in any document my brother had ever shared with me. I said, "The estate is worth $1.2 million. You have been sending me statements showing losses on accounts that were generating gains, which you were redirecting through a numbered company you registered, without disclosing it to me, or to the probate court. You had the cottage assessed by someone who owes you a personal favor. You have brought a notary to this table, who has not held a valid provincial commission for over a year." The notary stood up. His chair caught on the braided rug beneath the table. "Sit down." My lawyer's voice came from directly behind me. He had come through the back entrance, the door off the dock path that opens into the kitchen, the one that has never locked properly since my mother was alive. He was in his good wool coat, slightly windswept from the gravel road, entirely unhurried. "I'm already in contact with the Law Society, and the 2 OPP officers parked at the end of your road are waiting on my signal." My sister-in-law walked out of the kitchen. She was holding her phone in both hands, the way you hold something you are being careful not to drop. Her face was composed in a way I had never seen on her before. Not angry, not frightened, just decided. She said, "I've been recording from the moment she pulled up. But 3 weeks ago I emailed everything I found at home to her lawyer, because I found papers about a month ago and I didn't know who else to send them to." My brother turned and said her name, once. "The way you say a name when the word is the last argument you have left." She said, "I'm sorry, I should have called her the day I found them." He looked at her a moment longer, then he looked at me, and I saw something cross his face I hadn't expected. Not rage, not calculation, but something closer to the expression people make when the story they have been telling themselves stops holding together. He had been telling himself a story too, I understood. Probably that it wasn't really taking from me, because he was managing things better than I could have. Probably that I would have lost track of the money anyway. Probably that our mother would have found a way to understand. I don't know. I'll never be certain where the thing began. The OPP came through the front door. 2 officers, unhurried, the way authority looks when it already knows the shape of what comes next. The notary was arrested for fraud and misrepresentation and for practicing, without a valid commission. My brother's friend left through the front porch before the second officer reached him, but my lawyer photographed him at the door, and the formal complaint to his regulatory college had been filed the morning. My investigator pulled his name off a text thread in the document package. My brother was arrested for breach of fiduciary duty as executor, fraud, and misappropriation of estate funds. Additional charges would follow pending the forensic accountant's review. There would be a forensic accountant. My sister-in-law and I sat on the porch together and watched the OPP vehicles back down the gravel road until their lights disappeared into the birches. The lake was very still, the birches had gone yellow, the way they go in October up here, and it was genuinely one of the more beautiful nights I can remember. She pulled a blanket from the storage bench beside the door and put half of it across my lap, without asking. I said, "How long did you know?" She said, "Long enough that there's no version of the answer that makes me feel good about myself." She said the second part like she meant it, not as a request to be forgiven, but as a name for something she knew she was going to carry for a while, and had already accepted the weight of. I thought about my mother, about how my brother had always been the one she leaned on when something needed doing, because he was steady, because he was reliable, because he had that quality of being the person who always knows what to do next. I had grown up alongside that certainty, and let it cast a shadow long enough to live inside. For 3 years after she died, I had been standing in that shadow and calling it grief. I said, "You did call, that's what matters now." We sat on the porch until the cold made it impossible. Then we went inside, and I made tea in my mother's kitchen. The same kettle, the same shelf. And we sat there for another hour, while my lawyer worked through what came next, and the wood stove ticked down, and the lake outside went perfectly black and still. 8 months later, the estate is settled, the full amount, properly accounted for, and distributed according to what my mother actually intended. The forensic accountant found just over $400,000 that had been redirected through various accounts across 31 months. Some of it is recoverable. My lawyer says to expect a long process and to make peace with not getting all of it back, and I have made that peace, more or less. The cottage is mine. I spent 2 weeks there last August. My sister-in-law and the kids came up for the second week, because they needed somewhere to be that wasn't complicated, and the cottage has never been complicated. We cacked, we ate badly. The kids argued over the same board game 3 nights running. It was exactly what a cottage in Muskoka in August is supposed to be. My brother had told me for years that I didn't have a head for these things, that I was better off letting him handle it, that I was creative, feeling, a little scattered, a little like Mom at the end. He said it with what looked like care, and I want to be honest. I don't know whether he started out planning to take from me, or whether it began as something smaller. A quiet private conviction that he was more capable than I was, and grew from there into something he couldn't walk back from. I don't know, and I'm not sure it matters anymore. What I know is this: he needed me to believe I was incapable, and I came very close to giving him that for free. If something in your life isn't adding up, the numbers, the story, the version of yourself that someone keeps handing you and asking you to wear, trust the part of you that goes quiet when it knows something is wrong, not the play part. Not the grateful part, the part that started asking questions and then stopped, because it was easier not to. That part was right. It was right the whole time. The cottage is mine. My mother's roses are still along the east wall, gone a little wild after 3 summers without anyone to cut them back. I'm going to leave them that way for a while. They seem to know what they're doing.